Hello, everyone. This is Shauna, and I'm here with our weekly installment of the Bob and Nikki series discussion. We're now up to book 4, Starfoot, and there's a lot that happens in this installment. There's a lot of subplots that get opened up that continue over the next several books. There's a little bit of a subplot that had a tiny resolution, so we'll talk about some of that, but let me show you the cover of the ebook here before I start referring to some of my notes. So this is Starfoot. This is still part of the series that was published in 2019. There are books that were published over the next 4 years. He's still publishing books in the series, Jerry Boyd. But this is still part of the 2019 complement. So he was a busy guy in 2019, or the publishing was busy. I don't know how many he had written already, but this is book 4, as I said. And in this installment, we pick up where we left off at the end of book 3. I mentioned last week that there was a cliffhanger with Jim Bailey and his dog Molly. Jim had taken Bob's truck, if you remember, and driven it, and he actually gets bitten by one of the babies of the mama rattler um, that Sheriff Conway had removed from Bob's truck at the restaurant. So there were babies in the truck, and one of the babies bit Jim, and Molly crawls in with him. So that's the first scare. He does survive, and he's going to go on to play a much bigger role in the series. There's more subplots, as I mentioned. I'm going to share the my notes here so that I don't forget anything. But there's another character that's introduced called Steve Mason, who actually opens up this installment of the book. Steve Mason is is not Jim's, he's John Branham's old army buddy. And Steve opened up his own machine shop after they came back from Afghanistan. They served in Afghanistan together. And he opens up the book with the narration of some sort of strange squirrely order that he's gotten that he's not aware of. So he calls John to help him out. And and we add to the characters, we add Steve's cat Marcel to the list of characters. And so there's an incident that follows after that. I'll let you read about that, but it comes back into some characters. And at some point, if you remember that Bob wanted a hauler for his cars, right? He goes out and he had seen this saucer. So Bob is transporting a saucer while he's out looking for that. And a young boy sees him. They go on a raid, and I'll let you read about that. But they go on a raid, and this young boy sees him, Charlie Miller, and writes Bob an email saying that his grandfather is in a bad way, and could he come and help him? Only he's in Oregon, and Bob is in Missouri. So you've got now this subplot with Charlie Miller, and Charlie Miller is the young boy's name, and his grandfather. So there's a whole subplot about that. And there's historical context. I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Meanwhile, there's another subplot because if you remember, there was a derelict saucer at the bottom of Bob's property in the lake when the Missouri shifted course and the robots were building a tunnel to get the saucer out. And that's a whole subplot that sort of plods along throughout the course of this installment of the book. It's not a major installment of the book, but it does come up. So there's another major subplot there. And I have to say that the subplots in this installment are much better plotted and they're much better followed. There's almost too much action in one book here. It's like all the development that, you know, sort of the domestic plotting, and we get a lot of that. We get a lot more of the domestic issues and the expansions of the houses and acquiring more property. They're going to acquire actually a hospital in this installment. They're going to acquire a hospital, and there's a reason for that I'll get to in the next subplot. So we have the subplot with the whole feud, which is gonna get developed. We have the subplot with the tunnel. We have the subplot with Charlie Miller. And then there's another subplot involving another whole group of people that, because what happens is that Charlie Miller turns out to be legit, this young boy that Bob met. So they go to Oregon to help his dad. They get his dad in the auto dock, and there's a whole subplot involving Charlie that if they don't rescue him, that he's going to end up in foster care because his father is ill and whatnot. And so that's sort of continuing a bit into the next book, but they do get Charlie out of his situation. There's a corrupt social worker. There's some corrupt officials that are trying to make their life more difficult. And so Bob ends up taking Charlie, and this is a pattern that if you've been reading the books and following along, you know that Bob sort of picks up the stragglers that have nowhere else to go and sort of makes them part of his team and finds them jobs. He finds them jobs, and I think that's part of the reason why I really like the dynamic of this series, because he sort of enfolds you into the group and you have a role. He finds a role for you. If you don't have it, they find you a role, and if you don't fit in the role you have, they try to find you a different role, as long as they can depend on you to be helpful to them somehow. And so there's that subplot. The subplot of Shady Oaks in this one has kind of taken a little bit of a backseat. That's still going on. But it's less of a deal. It's mentioned a few times, but there's not really a development on that front in this book. But what happens is they one day Charlie is out and they run into a saucer that is in distress, as is their wont, because remember, their thing is fixing derelict saucers and helping the galactic citizens. So there's a saucer that comes in distress that is operated by Generalist Mendum, who is sort of the third prong of this conflict. And so the slave turns out to be this like hairy humanoid figure that people think is an animal, that turns out to be like a young Bigfoot or Sasquatch character. And so we have a whole new race of aliens in this installment. We have the Sasquatches. They're going to play a prominent role in the next few books as well. So Morning Flowers, the first one they meet, but the idea there is that these Sasquatches have been trafficked as slaves for galactic citizens, and they've been implanted with pain devices that basically make them comply with whatever their master wants them to do, and they're tortured if they don't do it, and they're connected to these pain devices that will eventually kill them if they mess up too much. So we have that subplot. There's a subplot involving Mountain View and a couple of her fellow Sasquatches, Farts Like Skunk and Mountain View, who was an elder. I'll let you read about that subplot if you go into that. But we have that. Meanwhile, they continue to rescue people, Bob and his team. And there's a man, Russell Coombs, that comes into the picture. Bob is coming back from one of his trips to pick up one of his vehicles, and Bob is in his new truck that's been so-called breathed on by the robot boys, and he skunks this guy in an Audi. Well, Russell Coombs, turns out they suspect that he's a government agent for the Galactics, but it turns out he's full of a lot more sinister intrigue than that. If you remember from book 2, there was a character, Janice Torum, who had a brooch that was poisoned that almost killed her, after Bob rescued her from her saucer with her granddaughter. And it turns out that Russell is the guy that planted the brooch to try to kill her. He's a professional assassin. So there's a mini plot involving Russell Coombs throughout this book. And I'll let you read about that later. There is another piece that comes with the plot for Bob when they're trying to figure out what to do with the feud between the Mendums, the Slongums, and the Mendums and the Slongums, and the third group that Bob is involved with. And that's going to get thicker as we go, but we do find Brandis at the end of the book, and Brandis is also bad news. I'll let you read about that uh, toward the end. But as I said, in terms of reviewing the book, I think um, if anything, this book is overpacked for the amount of subplots it has. I appreciate what um, Jerry Boyd was trying to do with the book, and it is one of my favorite installments in the series, but you have to really keep tabs on it to sort of figure out what's going on. There's a lot of subplots that are going to get developed. There's a lot that sort of gets not wrapped up, but advanced toward the end of the book. And there's a significant development in the last few pages of the book. It's not really a cliffhanger, but it's a significant push forward that's going to change the course of the next few books because it's going to involve another expansion of the Bob and Nikki universe, which Boyd is famous for. He's continuously expanding the cast of characters, and there's characters that play more minor roles, but there's characters, more and more characters play recurring roles. One of the things that I really like about this particular installment is you start to see Bob's expansion and his real treatment and respect of the robots, the things that have been sort of dropped and hinted at in previous installments about how he lets the bots have names. He lets them choose if they want to have names. He gives them jobs. He gives them autonomy. He gives them access to him and to the knowledge of his team members, like Jim Bailey, and in this book, Steve Mason. So Steve Mason's demolition experience and his disarming techniques, the bots learn about that. They're continuing to grow as the humans continue to grow and expand in their capabilities. And there's an emphasis on continual training. Yes, because of the constraints of the situation, for sure, but also because the characters are growing, they're expanding, they're challenging themselves, and they're having adventures together. And the bots are no exception. They continue to expand, to grow, to ask for new opportunities. And that's something that it's just nice to read about. And but it gives you something to think about in this era of AI and, grappling with the questions of how good is AI and will it take over, and what kind of relationships can we have with artificial intelligences. The interactions in Bob's books are very telling in that way, because he's very open about the fact that he wouldn't be able to do most of the stuff that he does without the bots, and how much good work they do. He lets them at one point, because he's been having them work on cars and machinery and whatever, he asks Topper to design new logos for the team. He says, I want you to you know power by Ozzy and paint by Topper, and power by Taz. So he gives them new logos, and it's about letting them sign their work and own it. So it's a very interesting and endearing sort of thing that happens. And he really does care for the bots as much as he cares for the humans. So there's this running sort of thread that, until you get to know, you call Bob Bob until you get to know him better. And then he has another nickname, which you can read about in the book. It's not all that obscene, but it's not a word that I want to use over the internet necessarily. So it's a word that, you know, people call him, starts with an A. But it's kind of a running joke because everybody knows that Bob would literally give you the shirt off his back, and he's done it for several of the characters. So you really get an insight into Bob and his team here, and you see a lot of threads. But that's about all I have for this installment, Bob and Nikki Book 4. Stay tuned next week when Book 5 will hopefully drop. That's my intention. I do go back to work on the 5th of January. They actually have a training for us on the 5th. So I'm recording some of these in advance. So you do have enough installments to get you through to the middle of January. But I will hopefully continue to drop one of these a week for you all. And if you're tuning in and watching the series, thank you very much. Stay safe. Have a great start to your new year. And I'll chat with you in my next video. Okay? Take care. We'll talk soon. Bye for now.